They promised they would be very happy. Her supporters awaited the results with unbridled enthusiasm. The future of France would finally be in her hands. So began the day of 7th of July in the ranks of the National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party. However, history repeated itself once again. The polls failed once more with the distribution of seats, and Le Pen crashed once again against a Macron, who we could well say has ceased to be the Sun King to become the French reincarnation of Rocky Balboa. No matter how many punches he takes, in the end it is always he who prevails in the ring. So perhaps the best description of the evening was made, curiously enough, by the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk.
In Paris, enthusiasm. In Moscow, disappointment. In Kyiv, relief. Enough to be happy in Warsaw.
Short, concise, and clear. Following the election results, most of Europe, and particularly the coalition supporting Ukraine, have breathed a sigh of relief. The extreme right-wing forces close to Vladimir Putin remain out of power for now. However, that is not enough. These elections leave us with many questions to answer and much to analyze. Who will govern France? Are we really facing a Macron victory? And where does that leave Marine Le Pen now? Well, today we're going to see all this and more in today's video. Let's get started. The elections in France raised enormous expectations. Macron called them by surprise after the resounding victory of Le Pen's party in the elections to the European Parliament. Remember that we are talking about elections in which the extreme right more than doubled the votes of Macron's coalition. And VisualPolitik community, the French president was very clear. It was time to vote and ask the French whether or not they really wanted a country dominated by Le Pen.
For me, who always considered that a united, strong, and independent Europe is good for France, this is a situation that I cannot bear. I have decided to return to you the choice of our parliamentary future with the vote.
And so he decided to gamble everything on a single card, to call elections and risk losing the government and becoming a pseudo-puppet for the remainder of his legislature. The challenge was difficult, but once again Macron has come out on top. These elections have recorded the highest turnout since 1997, and for now, Le Pen has been left out. But the first thing we need to know is what exactly was the result, and how does French politics work? These elections have been divided the seats among four major political blocs: the New Popular Front, left-wing Ensemble Together, the Alliance around Macron, Le Pen's National Rally Group, and the Republicans, who are the typical right-wingers. These four coalitions hold 93 of the seats. Then the rest are distributed among independent candidates and other smaller political formations, mostly from the centre-right. Well, this was the result, and here we have the first problem. There are many people, especially on social media channels such as X, who equate the results in France with the results in a country like Spain, or who see these large blocs as closed bodies. And the truth is that that isn't the case at all. We're talking about electoral coalitions made up of different parties that unite in the face of the legislative elections to try to unite the vote. They agree on a series of minimums, divide the candidacies, and run. This is done because France is divided electorally into 577 constituencies, each with approximately the same number of inhabitants. Each of these constituencies chooses only one deputy, the deputy of the most voted force. What's more, there are 2 rounds of voting. Therefore, in order to unite votes and win that deputy, the ideologically closest parties come together and form large coalitions. This is true for the polls, but once the election takes place, the parliament is made up of representatives of many more parties. For example, the New Popular Front, which has been the coalition with the most seats, is formed among others by the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, and France Insoumise, Mélenchon's radical left party. Well, the fact is that this explains that from this graph, we move on to this one. As you can see, we are clearly talking about a much more fragmented chart, and here lies the key to everything. To impose a government on the president, an absolute majority is required. That is 289 deputies. This is the number needed to carry out a motion of censure that would force the French president to agree on a government with the National Assembly. As long as that figure is not reached, the president remains quite free in choosing his government. He or she needs to secure a minimum support in the Assembly to be able to govern, so Macron will now have to agree on a plan with more moderate forces. That is to say, given how far the large blocs are from an absolute majority, the most likely outcome now is that the leading role in maintaining the government, or forming a new one, will once again fall to Macron, despite the fact that his coalition has lost 82 seats. It's true that, for that reason, he will no longer be able to do it alone. Now he will have to agree on a common agenda with other parties in order to have a reasonably operative government. But given that, on the one hand, there is Le Pen, and on the other hand, there are the extreme left parties. Well, what can I say? It would be strange to think that he will not succeed and that he will not be able to win the support of the moderates. In all likelihood, Macron will continue to pull the strings, something he would not have been able to do if one of these large blocs had obtained an absolute majority. If that had been the case, and it is certainly what Le Pen's party intended to achieve, then Macron would have to cede the government. That is, the figure of the prime minister and the ministers to the opposition. This is what is known in France as cohabitation, a moment when the president and the prime minister come from very different parties and even ideological currents. For example, a right-wing president and a socialist prime minister. This is a situation that has already occurred on other occasions, but now seems unlikely. And it doesn't seem likely, no matter how much Mélenchon, the leader of the far-left party France Insoumise, wants to show off and demand Macron put him or one of his candidates at the head of the new government, that he will make much of an impression. He certainly won't even get a whiff of the government, among other reasons because his party barely has 77 deputies out of the 185 that the new Popular Front has achieved. So even here it does not have a majority. So no, we can forget about Mélenchon, a politician descended from Algerian parents who advocates things like bringing forward the retirement age to 60 years, limiting the price of gasoline to €1.40, and leaving NATO. We'll talk about him at length on VisualPolitik in the near future. So the question is, what now? Well, Macron will now have to negotiate hard, not to keep the government, but above all to ensure a viable political agenda. Let's hope that his government has the minimum support in the assembly to be able to do something. And the question is, how can it do that? Well, here, all eyes are on the Socialist Party. It's taken for granted that Macron will get the support of the Republicans and the traditional right wing, as well as some independent candidates from the centre, but that would still not be enough. They would remain at 227 deputies, many more than those of the new Popular Front, or Le Pen's party, which in itself, if we think about it, could be an advantage, because the only way to freeze the government would be for the entire left and the extreme left to join hands with the extreme right. But in any case, if it wants to have a stable majority, it would be enough to add to the Socialist Party, which has 62 deputies. This would bring the total to 289, an absolute majority. Of course, this may not be easy, and obviously, in order to achieve it, Macron will have to juggle, and the government agenda is likely to lean more to the left, but it's far from the debacle that some have painted it to be. Today, the left-wing bloc may seem solid, but soon the internal competition for the highest possible prominence will begin. And do you know what? They didn't even celebrate the result together. There was no single act, which already tells us a lot about the possible lack of cohesion of this bloc. Of course, let me stress, the price to be paid will not be low. Proof of this is that the first secretary of the Socialist Party has already come out to raise the ante.
We will not lend ourselves to a coalition of opposites that betrays the vote of the French. There is only one compass, that of the program of the new Popular Front.
But he has also pressured himself to say that he would not support a candidacy of Mélenchon, or of any other candidate of the latter party for Prime Minister at all. This means that in order to negotiate, they will demand everything: the repeal of the pension reform, a change in economic policy, an increase in the minimum wage, ministers, perhaps a Prime Minister who is suitable for them. The list is long. It would not be unreasonable to see, for example, Macron appoint a Prime Minister and a government with a state profile, waving the flag of a grand coalition for Republican values. Negotiations may also never come to fruition, but let's not lose faith. Even so, things for Macron do not look so bad. It would even be enough to reach a minimum agreement on major state policies. Macron already came from a minority government in the assembly. What's more, after a year, the president can dissolve the assembly again. A powerful argument for many deputies who do not want to lose their seat. So we shall see. You see, above all, despite everything you may see out there, the extreme left has not won. And no, France will not be governed by communists. That said, another big question the night leaves us with is, what on earth happened to the far right? Weren't they supposed to be cruising to victory? Well, let's start at the beginning. Le Pen's result has not been particularly bad. Quite the contrary. She has gone from 88 to 143 deputies, which is not exactly a small increase. It's true that they expected a minimum of 211 and 273 very likely, and that is far from the result obtained. But be careful, because the deputies do not reflect the whole political and social reality of France. Perhaps the most important fact is that Le Pen has expanded her voter base to nearly 10 million votes in both the first and second round. More than 1 out of 3 votes went to her political party. The problem is that the remaining 60% of the French are furiously against this political formation, and Macron played with that trump card. After the catastrophe of the first round, he agreed with the new Popular Front that they would not compete against each other. In the constituencies where Macron's party was stronger, they would withdraw and ask for a vote in the second round for the candidates of the government group, and vice versa. Where Macron's party was behind, they would step aside and ask for the vote for the new Popular Front. It was a kind of alliance of all against the extreme right. This is what explains that despite being the most voted force of the night, with more than 10 million votes, it ended up behind in the scoreboard. In other words, Le Pen's problem is that her party has become so radicalized that although she has increasing support, she still has 60% of French people furiously against her. For example, one of the proposals that caused the greatest stir during the campaign was to make a change in the constitution to prohibit those who have another nationality, as well as French, from accessing many public jobs. But be that as it may, it continues to grow, and on reflection, the results were reasonably good for this formation.
Tide is rising. It did not rise high enough this time, but it is still rising, and therefore our victory has only been delayed.
And the question is, why? What is making more and more French people vote for Le Pen's party? Well, we can find many possible explanations. The prices, the policy against climate change, the loss of competitiveness, the aging population, the cost of energy, but above all, the answer lies right here.
I am very proud to carry the flag of France today. The majority of French people want us Muslims to stay in France.
We told you about it not long ago. The issue of social integration is pushing France to the limit. The problems absorbing immigrants, the cultural clash, the loss of values linked to the Republic, and poverty and the violence in the ghettos formed around public housing are turning the country into a huge bomb about to explode. The numbers are crazy. To give you an idea, it's estimated that about 50% of the children in these kinds of ghettos, where first and second generation immigrants live, are poor. Unemployment is almost double the national average, and of course, family incomes are much lower. To top it off, 1 out of 5 foreigners living in France thinks they are discriminated against because of their origin, their race, or their religion. This is one of the highest rates in the developed world, and something that drives many French people, starting with the president himself, crazy.
Health is free, school is free, and sometimes we have the feeling that it is never enough.
Of course, all these problems that have been fueling Le Pen and the National Rally are not only not going to go away, but likely are going to get worse. So beware of thinking that the Le Pen movement has been defeated, not by a long shot.
Things will deteriorate. The French will understand that a real alternation is needed. Do you think the problem of immigration, lack of security, debt, purchasing power will be solved in a country without a real majority?
In any case, if there is one thing these elections make clear to us, it is, first, that French politics is polarizing at full speed, and that the extremes are gaining more and more influence. It is enough to take a look at how the political composition of the assembly has evolved. Secondly, the hitherto new Sun King, Emmanuel Macron, has lost much of his star power. After 7 years of managing the country with an iron fist and pushing through many difficult reforms, these days he's not exactly the most popular politician. That his own coalition asked him to participate as little as possible in campaigning is good evidence of this. Third, changes in France will be much more difficult from now on. This is not good for what is still the second largest economy in the European Union. And fourth, it is possible, if the composition of a relatively stable government fails, that Macron will seek an even hotter international profile. That is to say, that he will give priority to foreign policy and the military, which in France are primarily the responsibility of the president. Perhaps Macron's new strategy for survival is to further extend his influence in the European Union, to show the French how he is rebuilding the greatness of France. At least that would be good for Ukraine. We shall see. On VisualPolitik, we'll be very attentive to all the developments, and very soon we will publish a video about the future of the national rally, Le Pen's party. Because after these elections, the problems that are driving this formation will not only not go away, but are likely to go further. But for now, it's your turn. What is your assessment of these results? A straightforward and clear question. Let the debate be opened up in the comments. And now, if you found this video interesting, as always, we ask you to give us a hand by giving us a like. All the best. See you next time.